All right, hi, my name is Nick Glenn. I'm a first-year MBA candidate here at Tuck. And today it's my pleasure to host the Growers Panel, where we'll discuss the economics of growing food at commercial scale. Joining me today, we have four panelists. Our first panelist is Ron Moore. Ron is a third-generation farmer. He now grows with his son, who's a fourth-generation farmer. They grow 1,600 acres of row crops in Northwest Illinois. They also have 150 acres in pasture. Additionally, Ron was the past president of the American Soybean Association, where he represented the interests of over 500,000 farmers. So thanks for joining us, Ron. Our next panelist is Mitchell Hora. Mitchell is a seventh-generation farmer in Iowa, where he currently grows corn and soybeans on over 700 acres. His family has been practicing no-till for over 40 years. They also utilize cover crops. Mitchell is also the owner of Continuum Ag, a soil health consulting company. Continuum operates in 40 U.S. states and 12 countries. They leverage data to help farmers manage their soil and fertility health. Continuum is also involved in carbon sequestration, so we're looking forward to hearing about that, Mitchell. Additionally, we have Carie Moore. Carie and her husband farm 8 different crops on over 650 acres in North Dakota. Her kids are already fourth-generation farmers. Carie is also the vice president of her county farm bureau board. She's a volunteer educator, and she runs a great blog called Tractor Rounds and Coffee Grounds. Thanks for joining us, Carie. And then finally, we'll have Manuel Tezanos Pinto. I think we're having a few technical issues, but we'll pull him into the panel here momentarily. Manuel is a 2006 graduate of Tuck and the current CFO of Grapeman Farms. Grapeman and its subsidiary operations have been growing table grapes for over 50 years, and their operations now spread from California, Mexico, Peru, and Chile. Thanks for joining us, Manuel. And a special thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. We understand it's the middle of planting season, so thanks for taking the time to speak with us. Our first topic is farming economics. So we're curious to hear about your business model. So I'll start with Ron. Ron, tell us broadly about your business model and what factors shape the decisions that you make on your farm on an annual basis.
Sure. Well, our farming operation is as Nick said, 1,600 acres of row crop, soybeans and corn, and then we have a feeder cattle operation. But we're kind of diversified in that respect, that we have a livestock operation as well as a row crop operation. That does allow us to take advantage of possibly different income levels. From if row crop prices are high, the livestock might not be as lucrative, and if livestock or row crop prices are low, then generally the cattle market is a little better than it has been. So, but our farming operation is fairly capital intensive. I own 600 acres, and then we rent the rest of our ground from either family members or longtime landlords. And part of the challenge that farmers have is that the margins are small generally, and this area is highly competitive for farmers to rent land, and so typically a landowner is going to get a 3% return, 3 to 4% return off of their investment or value of their land. And if you're not able to provide that on either as an owner, have enough income to pay the mortgage back plus interest, or as a renter, you've got to make sure that the landowners that you rent from are getting that 3 to 4% return. And so if you're not able to generate that kind of return through cash rent or a crop share lease agreement, most likely those landowners are going to look for some other tenant farmer to do that kind of work and guarantee that they get an equitable return on their investment. Now, each person is different. They have, they may or may not accept 3%. They may accept 2% of return on their investment. Each individual is different, and so that's why it's a lot of competition in the marketplace for renting more land. Typically, land in our area this winter has been going for $10,000 to $14,000 an acre. So if you're farming 1,000 acres for someone else, you're managing $10 million to $14 million of assets. And if you aren't going to get them a reasonable return off of their investment, then they're going to look elsewhere. And so that makes it very competitive in the marketplace trying to rent more land. The margins typically have been the last 5 years have been relatively narrow. This year we've had a lot of factors that come into play that will have increased the value of the commodities that we raise. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but so these are good returns right now, but typically row crop agriculture is boom or bust. Yeah. And you have one or 2 years of boom, and then 3 to 5 years of not a boom. And so you've got to save those dollars when you have the good prices that we're experiencing right now for those times when corn's not $6 and beans are not $15. So, that's you have to plan for the future by saving when you can. And that's kind of the business model that we've done. Where I live in Western Illinois, it's corn and soybean production. We don't really have a market for specialty crops or vegetable crops. We just live in a sparsely populated area in my county. And so we don't have a lot of infrastructure for doing something different than raising corn and soybeans and some cattle and a few hogs around here. So that's kind of the business model that we've been doing for the last 30 or 40 years.
Great, thanks, Ron. That makes a lot of sense. We'll hand it off to Mitchell. We'll pose the same question. Mitchell, just tell us about the factors that shape the decisions you make on your operation.
Yeah, so the primary crops on our farm being corn, soybeans, very similar type of situation to Ron, where we're playing the markets. We're in an area where there's a lot of hogs as well, similar to Ron. Our farms are about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours away from each other. Mine being in Southeast Iowa, and very similar type of situation. We own about half of our ground. Very similar prices on very competitive annual rate of for cash rent. And being able to purchase ground is tough. I bought some after graduating from Iowa State a couple years ago, right around $9,000 an acre, and now it's definitely significantly higher. Land around us, very similar to Ron, $10,000 to $14,000 is the going rate around here. So was able to get in a couple years ago, but it's significantly gone up since. How we're really working to ensure that we have profitability on our farm is through diversification and fine tuning utilizing soil health systems. So we mentioned corn, soybeans. This year we will actually have rye as well. Last year we grew corn, soybeans, rye, malt barley, and mustard. The year before we had some wheat. So we have really tried to diversify our system a lot. As mentioned in my bio, we've been really focused on implementing regenerative ag practices for a really long time. And through implementing regenerative systems, after a couple of years, we see a massive shift in our soil to being more biologically driven and less chemistry driven. So through the utilization of soil testing, like the Haney soil health test and other technology, we've been able to better fine tune our soil, better understand the data that comes with implementing regenerative ag. And because of that, we've been able to decrease our synthetic fertilizer by 45%. We've decreased our pesticides by up to 75%. maintained record crop yields, and improved other things like carbon sequestration, water infiltration, soil aggregate stability, reduce erosion, and reduce our overall environmental footprint. We're not necessarily participating directly in carbon markets or other initiatives at this time. They have a lot of development that's needed, but factoring in what we can control, which is where we're spending our money on fertilizer, on other capital expenditures. We've actually downsized our farm equipment because we don't need as much horsepower without utilizing tillage, and being able to just fine tune and better track the items that we have control of as farmers, because there are so many unknowns in farming with weather and outside markets. So we're really trying to control the things that we control and utilize technology to help us to make those decisions.
Great. We'll hand it off to Carie.
So we're similar in a lot of situations, but different. Like we said, we farm 650 acres. And of that, where we're at in northern North Dakota, we are able to have diverse crop rotations, which is very good for our soils because we can alternate like our wheat and barley with our soybeans, again, cutting down the amount of nitrogen that we're going to put back into the soil. I mean, let the plants do it for you. So we're able to work a lot with soil health just in our crop rotations. That helps, again, with when we go to spray for insecticides, pesticides. You're not going to get the same kind of bugs on the same kind of plants. So the more rotations you can put in with your crops, you're not going to attract the same kind of things that are going to eat those plants. So that's one big thing that we are able to cut down in some of our fertilizer applications. Another big thing that we have really started doing, I worked 10 years for our soil conservation district, and again, did a lot of work with soil health and cover crops, working with farmers and ranchers. So we started implementing that probably about 8 years ago on our farm. We started farming in 2012. So shortly after that, about 3 or 4 years into that, we started with the cover crops because we have a lot of salinity here in North Dakota, whether it's ditch effect. We are in like the prairie pothole region, so we have sloughs all throughout our fields. And once you get those salinity patches, they just expand and expand, especially with our high water table. So the more that we can do to get those areas back into production, that's just more money in our pockets because it's land that we're farming and we want to be able to farm it. So again, that's where we get the diversification in with our cover crops. I'm anywhere from 5 to 7 to 8 different species that we don't necessarily do in our crop rotation. I try to get those as well into the cover crops. So again, the more diversity, the more root systems, the more things you're putting back in your soil. So again, I mean, your soil is what grows everything. So that's what drives how you farm. The other thing that we do is we are on a crop share with my husband's parents. We don't rent any land, and it works in all of our favors. Just for financial, again, beginning farmers, for us to try to go and get our operating loan every year with not a lot of collateral, not a lot of, we don't have any land to put up. So that's money that we don't have to figure into our operating loan each year. It's already taken care of. We do an 80-20 crop share. And so we do all of the inputs, but then at harvest time, when it gets to the elevator, we get 80%. The in-laws get 20%. The other part of that is the crop insurance. We split 80-20, but otherwise everything else is on us. That also helps them as far as it's not an income as taxes from us. We don't have to worry about it on our operating side. It helps with marketing. So my father-in-law is very good at marketing. So even if we do have a bad year farming, he's able to market his own crop. He can store it at the elevator if he wants longer. He's able to take that crop and sell it when he needs it. Where again, that works in our favor too. We're able to sell and do whatever we want with our 80% of the crop. So it's much better for us than a lease and cash rent agreement. And then the other side of it too is you look at it, he could probably get more cash rent from the people that are around us, but it goes back to that non-monetary, it's generational. It's keeping the family on the land, knowing that now we're going to go in with our kids to a 4th generation farm. that's worth more than money in a lot of farm families. I mean, you can't really put a price tag on successional farming. The other major thing that we did probably 3 years ago was we chose for me to not work off the farm. I became the primary farmer, I guess you could say, the primary operator, which has been a lot of trial and error and a lot of video conferencing calling neighbors. But each year you learn a little more because again, you do the same things in the spring, same things in the fall. It's just a lot of where my downfall is. I know how to do a lot of vehicle mechanics, but not so much on tractors and implements. So where my husband has that knowledge, he's been working on farms all his life. So he is hauling anhydrous and fuel and went back to doing that. Because if he needs to go take a load at 3 o'clock in the morning and be home by 10 or 11, so we can both be in the field, or if there's something that we both need to be on the farm to do, he has a lot more flexibility in a trucking schedule than I did at an office in town. So we don't have to worry about the daycare for the kids. The kids are able to be here and help me. So that has been financially it's taken a lot of burden off of us, but again, we deal with the stress, and again, each year gets easier and easier, and I'm able to learn more and more. But the biggest thing is just, being present for me as a woman. When we go talk to the bank, when we go talk to crop insurance, I need to be there as well, because if it's going to be where he's not here and they need to call and ask a question, me being the primary operator, I need to be able to say, yes, this is what I'm doing, and have those lines of communication open, because there's so many people involved between the in-laws, us as the couple, all the different people that are dealing with our inputs. So you just have to keep the line of communication open so you can handle all those financial situations. I mean, and like you said, it is a business. So everyone is technically some kind of an employee. And so they all need to have buy-in and be able to understand what's going on.
Awesome. Thanks, Carie. Yeah, the explanation on the crop share makes a lot of sense. Manuel, we'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, good. Yeah, well, first, thank you very much for having me. Really excited. And yeah, for us, what drives the profitability in table grapes, it has to do mostly with the quality. And we've been very challenged because the market has been changing. So we need to keep up with the market, and we need to change the varieties. And that's a lot of money that we need to lock for 10 years. So it's very capital intensive. So what we do is we also try to diversify, as they mentioned, but we diversify across different varieties to make sure that we don't put all our eggs on a given basket. The other thing that was mentioned before, they talked about the data and how we monitor all the applications, and whether it's the cultural practices or whether it's the amount of pesticides or chemicals that we apply, we monitor that very closely, and that has been a big challenge because, yeah, and I think the key success factor for us is to keep the quality, because there are different grades sold, and one could be about 15 or 20% higher price. Yeah, that's it. Another challenge that we have in California, additional to what was already mentioned, two big ones are water and labor. So those are two big things. And also we're being very proactive and trying to attract the best laborers, the best crews, as well. Also very proactive about water management and be more efficient, because as year over year, we have bigger challenges on that. And we find that to be a constraint, not only the high cost, but on top of that, the constraint. That's it. Yeah, for me.
Thanks, Manuel. So we'll kind of transition here from just your business model itself towards our second topic, which is sustainability. So we'll start with Mitchell. Mitchell, how do you think about sustainability on your farm, and how do you weigh that against short-term profitability?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And obviously sustainability and environmental components of farming has really come to the forefront in a good way. Farmers have really been pointed at as part of the issue with Gulf of Mexico, or with carbon in the atmosphere, or flooding, or utilizing water out of the aquifers, what have you, or human health issues for that matter too. But now farmers are being looked to as part of the solution for all of these problems. We've kind of pointed out here, a variety of us, that solving those problems all starts with the soil. And that's where we think about sustainability. In order to implement sustainability, we have to be building up our soils. The current standard across the US is to be losing 5 tons of soil per acre per year, which is like the width of a piece of paper or a dime or something, like very, very minuscule. You wouldn't necessarily see it all the time, but that's the standard through, just kind of what's factored in from the government standpoint, that would be losing 5 tons per acre per year. Obviously, that's not sustainable. That's why we have to be able to implement regenerative systems to build up our soils. And we do that by implementing principles of soil health to keep that ground covered, reduce tillage, reduce our inputs that are causing disturbance to the natural system, and keeping living roots out there all the time through diversification and cover crops. And we need to be able to, continue to drive on these principles of soil health. We think about that as, it needs to work, on a long-term payback. Soil health can definitely pay over time. Switching to a regenerative system or whatever kind of production system a farm wants to get into, they can probably make the economics work in the long term. Organic or conventional row crop, like we're mostly hitting on here today, or specialty crops like Manuel's part. Everybody can get this to kind of work for their economic situation, but we're looking at balancing those economics with our environmental impact and the overall sustainability impact. The key thing for us has been to fine tune where we are spending money and make sure that that dollar that we are spending is kind of getting on both ends of that spectrum. When we first started using cover crops, we didn't know what we were doing. We thought you could just plant a cover crop and it would work. And we ended up hurting ourselves to the tune of $100 an acre, which on average, our total revenue per acre would be $850, $900 per acre. So losing $100 is massive. But we did not have the data. We didn't know what we were doing. Now the knowledge is so much more widely available for farmers to better understand how to reduce the risk when adding new sustainable practices. What we're finding today, I mentioned some of it earlier, that now, because we have a better understanding of data and a better understanding of biology, we are able to reduce our expense side of the equation, better allocate dollars to be more sustainable, and actually drive yields or drive overall profitability on a yearly basis from the get-go. So I truly believe farmers can have both. We can have sustainability and we can have profitability. Farmers can be a solution not only to provide the feed, fuel, and fiber for the world, but to sequester carbon and improve water quality and improve nutrient density of our crops. But we just need better understanding of how to utilize the right data tools to drive an action. And from an ag tech standpoint, and being in ag tech and being a startup founder myself, I think a lot of companies look at providing more data for the sake of more data. Farmers do not need that. We have tons of data all the time. It's an overload of data. What we have to be able to have is, how do we take all this data and create an action that drives profitability and drives these other things. Driving sustainability or sequestering carbon or improving water quality, those things are all great and we want to do that. But if our farm is not going to be economically sustainable, none of the environmental sustainability things really matter, because our family farm won't be here anymore. It's not going to work if it's not profitable. So data for the sake of driving actionable decisions to drive profitability and help farmers to implement more sustainable systems. That's how we really think about it on our farm.
Great. That's awesome, Mitchell. Carie, we'll hand it off to you. How do you think about sustainability?
I agree 100%. The two biggest things that are driving the farms going into the future are technology and our soils. And so, I mean, here again, we have a lot of diversity in our crops. When you get into your low residue crops, like say your soybeans, those are tough years for us. North Dakota, we don't have a lot of trees. And soybeans, because of our growing season, it's too late to put a cover crop in for us. I mean, they would never grow. So we struggle on those years on the fields that we put in soybeans, but you know, every year after that, we were either going to have barley or wheat or some other kind of crop that's going to hold the snow and the dirt in place. A lot of guys we do a lot of tree plantings here in North Dakota. We're getting guys into the cover crops because when the wind blows 60 miles an hour here, which it does quite frequently, especially the past years, we have bulldozers and skid steers out in the ditches picking up topsoil, putting it back into the fields because once it blows, there's nothing to stop it. And so getting those trees in the ground, getting the cover crops, a lot of our agronomists up here aren't familiar with cover crops. They're made to sell cash crops. And so they're not familiar with what mixes the farmers need to use, how the different chemicals that you put down are going to affect. If there's a lag time where you can't plant another crop, it's going to kill your cover crop just like it would another crop that you would plant. So that's again why a lot of, why your soil conservation districts and a lot of these guys are going out as consultants, because treating cover crops, you have to treat it like a cash crop. It costs money to put it in the ground, and you can't necessarily put a dollar amount right away of what your return is going to be on that. And so a lot of guys, yes, with the technologies are getting back into soil sampling. Don't put down what you don't need. If it's in the soil and your cover crops are doing it, you don't need to be applying and over applying things into the soil. And so how the cover crops and technology and the data comes into, there's so many different cover crops to choose from, just like there's so much data out there. You need to know what your resource concerns are to pick your cover crop mix. I mean, you have to know what you need to do on your farm in order to pick those species. It's just like the data. You need to know what you're going to do with that data. Otherwise, why collect it? It's just an overload on your computer. It's overwhelming to farmers. I mean, with our general age of being 50, 60 years old and all this technology being thrown at them, if there's not another generation coming up on the farm that can help them, that's going and getting a degree in ag technology, they don't know what to do with all that. So the soils and the technology, you have to know what you're going to do with it in order to collect and get all those resources. Otherwise, they're just sitting there. You don't know what to extract from them.
Great. Manuel, we'll hand it off to you. What does sustainability look like on your farms?
Sustainability for us, the main thing by far, of course, has to do with, as I said before, water. And yes, we keep a track of that. We keep track of the moisture real time, we do drip irrigation, and yes, we have improved. I don't think we have improved as other specialty crops like almonds, but I think we're on our way. And I think it's the challenge. Then the other piece about sustainability has to do with the reducing the inputs. Some other growers went organic, but for us, it's really challenging. It's really challenging when you're sitting on a vine that you spend the tens of thousands of dollars and you expect to grow it for 10 years. So it's too big. We see too big a risk, right? Unlike other crops that probably are with shorter life. But I like to go back and echo a lot of what has been said about the technology, about the data, because exactly that. I see a lot of data, and we have an additional challenge, which is, yes, we collect data because reports how many agrochemicals we put. We collect all kind of data, labor data, as much as you can imagine, but it's very difficult for us to really first of all, to compare year over year, because of every year for us is very different because of the weather and this and that, but also collecting the data itself is a gigantic task. And I love data, I'm the CFO, no? But nevertheless, it's very hard for me to justify what are the decisions really we're gonna drive. Yes, we want to look for value, but it's very difficult to put a finger and say, okay, here's the ROI. So because it's not clean, because it needs to be cleaned up, and because it comes from completely different sources, right? Yeah. Hi, Nicolas. That's it for me.
Ron, we lost our moderator.
Yeah, so that's what I was just going to say. I'll take a stab at this. But first off, I want to echo Mitchell's comment about profitability. You have to have profitability on a farm before you can do anything else, any improvements or continuous improvements. And so I want to echo that comment that he made. And for me, sustainability is, and I've dealt with this through the Soybean Association for a decade or more. And I'll kind of give you my thumbnail description of what sustainability means to me. It's increasing the production of food while preserving our natural resources and making our communities a better place to live. And that goes kind of to three pillars of sustainability: economic, environmental, and then social. And that kind of ties all three of them together. You know, when I first started farming and back in the 70s, when I was in high school, we used to moldboard plow all of our ground. Just turn the soil upside down in the fall and leave it black. And so my father was doing some drainage, putting a tile line down to the little stream to drain a CP spot in a hillside. And I was there helping put it in when I was in high school. After I started farming, that tile line got plugged. And so we hired a guy to come in with a backhoe to dig it up and find out where the plug was. Well, we couldn't find the tile outlet because it was covered up. It was covered up by an extra 3 feet of dirt that had washed off the hillside and covered the outlet so it wasn't draining correctly. And that was my aha moment that we need to do something different. And so we started doing, you know, at that point, we weren't involved in the no-till. We didn't have that kind of planter technology. So we ended up doing some chisel plowing to reduce the reduce tillage, leaving more corn stalk residue on the soil. We eventually moved into pretty much all no-till. We no-till all of our soybeans and most of the corn that goes into going into after the soybean crop. We have a few farms that are what I call really black gumbo. And if you don't do a little bit of tillage, it just won't dry out in the springtime in our area. So we have to do a little bit of tillage on those farms. But for the most part, we're either no-till or very limited tillage. And so that's how we're doing sustainability practices. And one of the reasons we went to the little tillage on that land that's called black gumbo is when we had it in soybeans, because we couldn't get if we no-tilled the beans and the corn stalks, we couldn't get it planted until June because it stayed so wet. The soil stayed so wet. So we did a little bit of tillage, got it planted in May, increased our yields on those fields of soybeans by 10 bushel to the acre. So there is where I come from in increasing the production of food while preserving our natural resources, because we do a little bit of both, a little bit of minimum tillage and a lot of no-till. And we have experimented with cover crops. We used to I raised cattle, so we had cereal rye that we would put in after we cut corn silage and then chop it for feed for the cattle for the next year, and then put soybean crop back on it again. We've experimented with cereal cover crop rye. It's been, in our situation, it's been inconsistent, and I'm looking for a more consistent delivery system or germination system for the cover crops. So I'm interested offline, maybe Mitchell and you and I can talk about how we can make those things better.
Great. Well, we're about out of time, so I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank all our panelists. This has been a fantastic conversation, and we appreciate you taking the time. I understand, Ron, you have a couple more days of planting. I think Mitchell just finished, and Carie, good luck finishing the planting season. I know you're kind of dealing with the drought up in North Dakota, but good luck, and Manuel, good luck with your operation as well. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
In about 2 minutes, we have our next panel. That'll be a fireside chat on public-private partnerships in the agricultural landscape with Paul Lightfoot. That conversation will be moderated by Susan Friedberg. So we'll take a quick break, and then we'll move on to our next panel. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you again.